So it's time for some more practice. A few things that you need to keep in mind are, first, roughly speaking, you'll have around 1.25 minutes per question for a paragraph argument type question. You know, the type of question where you just have a 3 to 4 line paragraph and then they just ask you one question where you have to critically reason with it, sorry. And the second thing is, since you must be in your within your first 2 weeks of practice, so I strongly recommend taking written aids just so your brain develops the habit of differentiating between the two main subtypes of text, right? Which is information and arguments, right? If I were to put a third point in there, I would probably say that just remember the learnings, the takeaways from the last practice session, right? How you should be taking written aids, how you should be turning the question into an action item, and how you should be using elimination method when you are weighing options and looking for the correct one. On a difficulty scale of 1 to 5, I would rate this question in easy 4.5, right? So yeah, it is one of the difficult questions. But then it reinforces and bolsters the idea that on the GRE, you should, regardless of whether the question seems very intimidating or very easy, you should have this standard structure of approaching things step by step in a very structured way. Let's do that here. It says, although the earliest surviving Greek inscriptions written in an alphabet date from the 8th century BC. Okay, so that to me sounds like a fact that the earliest writing start from the 8th century BC. So they start 8th century BC and onwards. The fact that the text of these Greek inscriptions sometimes runs from right to left and sometimes from left to right. Okay, so the fact that these Greek inscriptions sometimes run from right to left and sometimes from left to right, that's information, indicates that the Greeks adopted alphabetic writing at least 2 centuries before these inscriptions were produced. And if I analyze the language here a little. It's definitely a position, it's not a fact. They do not know for sure that the Greeks adopted alphabetic writing at least 2 centuries before these inscriptions were produced. So yeah, I would jump into the position column or the non-fact column. That this fact somehow indicates that the Greeks adopted alphabetics at what's 2 centuries before 8 BC. So it's before Christ, 9, 10. I mean, that doesn't matter, but I just want to be accurate there as well. Okay, so this somehow indicates they adopted alphabetic writing in 10th century BC or before that, right? They adopted alphabetic writing there. Of course, I'm writing slow because I'm explaining in parallel, but as you solve these questions, you'd be doing it fast. So adopting alphabetic writing 10th century BC or before that. Okay, fine, fair enough. Let's move on. Then it says, after all, the Greeks learned alphabetic writing from the Phoenicians. Well, that to me sounds like a fact. So it goes back to the fact column and tells you, throws and slips in another fact saying that the Greeks learned it from the Phoenicians. And presumably, along with the alphabet, they also adopted the then current Phoenician practice with respect to the direction of the text. So presumably they did two things. They adopted alphabet writing from the Phoenicians and also the direction of the text. Yeah, that doesn't sound like hardcore information. So yeah, they adopted alphabetic writing. I'm just going to do that instead of writing the whole thing, plus the direction of the text. Okay, it's one of those paragraphs which do not take form till the last line. So let's just keep reading on. And although Phoenician writing was originally inconsistent in direction, okay, by the 8th century BC, Phoenician was consistently written from right to left and had been for about 2 centuries. Yeah, that's information. So it goes back to giving you more information that Phoenician was originally inconsistent, but by the 8th century BC it was consistent and it had been for 2 centuries, for about 2 centuries. That's a fancy way of saying that it was consistent 10th century BC and onwards. It was consistent and was written from left to right. Yeah, and it was written from left to right. Okay. So I think the synopsis of this paragraph would be that the author wants to say that these Greeks, that is the author's position, that these Greeks adopted alphabetic writing in 10th century BC or before that, right? And they also, and the author is kind of saying that because he or she has a fact that the earliest surviving Greek inscriptions that have been found are from the 8th century BC and they're inconsistent. And then we know that they adopted alphabetic writing from the Phoenicians. And Phoenicians were consistent in 10th century. They got consistent somewhere in the probably in the 10th century BC, and they were consistent afterwards. So we know for a fact that these Greeks adopted alphabetic writing from them, but the fact that they are inconsistent, even in the inscriptions found from the 8th century BC, indicates that they must have adapted alphabetic writing from the Phoenicians when they themselves were inconsistent, right? And we know for a fact that they were consistent in 10th century BC and onwards. So yeah, so that's the argument that these Greeks must have adapted somewhere in the 10th century BC when the Phoenicians were still not consistent or before that, right? This is not a fact, this is the author's argument. All right. In the argument given, the two portions in boldface play which of the following roles? Acha, this is the typical boldface related question where my thing was, uh, of course, after observing that the GRE options a lot of times put these bold faces in wrong categories of text to begin with. So my thing was, let me decide the category of text that each bold face falls in. Like if I read the first bold face, right, it says, the fact that the text of these Greek inscriptions sometimes run from right to left and sometimes from left to right. Okay, so it's a fact in short. And the second one is also telling you that Phoenicians were originally inconsistent in direction, and by the 8th century BC, Phoenician was consistently written from right to left and had been for about 2 centuries. So basically, these two are not positions, not arguments. Both of these are facts. This is a fact. That's a fact. Just a cursory look, and you would understand that while you're solving these questions on your own. So I would then just skim through the options a little. So the first and the second each describe evidence. Okay, that part's correct. The first is evidence, blah blah blah. The second is no possession. That's wrong. I'm gonna eliminate B then and there before even diving deep into reading it completely, entertaining it in that way. Now, the first is evidence. Okay, perfect. The second is a consideration that is introduced to counter the. Okay, fine. I'm not going to eliminate it. The first and the second each describe provide evidence. Okay, E says that the first provide evidence. The second is that is a second is no position. Okay, so B and E go out of the window then and there. It cannot be correct because they're not even classifying the two bold faces correctly to begin with. Okay, fine, fair enough. Okay, now let's see. So the question is, in the argument given, the two portions in boldface play which of the following roles? Okay, the first and the second each describe evidence that has been used to challenge the position. What's the position of the argument? The position is that they adopted alphabetic writing in 10th century BC or before that. So are these facts challenging that? I don't think. I mean, the author is saying that Greeks adopted alphabetic writing in 10th century BC or before that by standing on the shoulders of these two facts. The fact that the inscriptions found from 8th century BC have inconsistency in direction, and the fact that Phoenicians were consistent by 10th century BC. That is 2 centuries before that, right? So yeah, it supports the position that the author is trying to take. So A cannot be correct. C. Um, the first is evidence that forms the basis for an objection to. I mean, I've already established that both evidences are basically acting like a premise for the position that the argument is seeking to establish. So this cannot be correct. Yep. All right. So that part right there, which I've enclosed in brackets, and let me even highlight it. Okay, so that part right there, nah, not correct. Both evidences are basically like like the foundation of the argument that the author seeks to establish, the paragraph seeks to establish. So of course it has to be D, but let's see if we can make sense out of D, and that's something that I really recommend. Knowing why an option is incorrect is necessary, but so is knowing why an option is correct, right? And of course, on the actual GRE, while you're taking the actual test, those neural patterns that you form during practice would be kind of on autopilot as it is with neural patterns or habits. But during practice, we have to make sure, okay, we identify, okay, so this is wrong because of this, that's correct because of that. Let's see. So the first and the second each provide evidence in support of the position, yep, that the argument seeks to establish. Yeah, that's very straight away. The link is quite clear. Like if I'm saying that they adopted in 10th century BC or before that, and someone asks me, okay, why are you saying that? I can tell them, A, these Greeks were inconsistent in 8th century BC, and they adopted alphabetic writing from Phoenicians. And Phoenicians, guess what? Phoenicians got consistent 2 centuries before them, right? They were consistent 2 centuries before. or ago. So that means that these Greeks either learned somewhere in the 10th century BC from them how to write in alphabetic form, and of course they also adopted the inconsistency of direction, or somewhere before that, right? So yeah, these two evidences in the bold faces would be the foundations for my argument. So option D is correct. Phytonutrients, 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 let's just call them phytonutrients. So phytonutrients found in fresh fruits and vegetables have beneficial effects on the human cardiovascular system. Okay, that's information. So some pH nutrients, I'm just going to call them, are good for cardiovascular. I'm not gonna write that word completely. So cardiovascular, okay, I did. And then it goes on to saying that because heart disease is a major health concern, American doctors should encourage all people, especially those with heart disease, to eat a diet high in fresh fruits and vegetables. Yeah, that feels like a pretty straightforward paragraph, right? It jumps right into taking a position or making an argument. So because heart disease is major problem, I'm just taking written aid in my own borderline uh, Aspergic way. So heart disease is a major health concern. Doctors should be encouraging people, especially those with heart disease, to eat a diet high in phytonutrients. Okay, now which of the following, if true, provides the most support for the argument above? Or in short, if I were to turn that into an action item, yes, they should be encouraging people to eat a diet high in fresh fruits and vegetables. Yeah, yes, they basically have to pick an option which shows, yeah, they should be doing it. Okay, I do not even need to write the action item here. So I think, I personally think this is an easy question, but then difficulty is subjective. Anyway, moving on. So the combination of soluble and insoluble fibers found in whole grains also support heart health, and that is why American doctors should encourage people, especially those with heart disease, to eat a diet high in fresh fruits and vegetables. Like, how does this make a case for fresh fruits and vegetables? I mean, if anything, it would weaken the argument, no? It's like, forget fresh fruits and vegetables. There's another thing which also supports heart health. Now, it's not doing what we want it to do. B, a large percentage of those who suffer heart disease in the United States do not live close to large agriculture areas where fruits and vegetables are grown. Okay, so they're not good. That's an assumption. I was just about to assume, I was this close to assuming that because they do not live close to large agriculture areas, that necessarily means that implies they do not get access to fruits and vegetables. And that's an assumption. If I pick this option, I'd be assuming that this implies nah. Okay, it wants me to assume something. Okay, I'm not gonna cross it right away. Let's put it in a maybe. Smoking cigarettes is a much more serious health risk than the okay, fine. So what? Should the doctors be telling them to quit cigarettes instead of uh, going for a diet high in fruits and vegetables? Well, that doesn't support my argument. I want to make an argument that they should be telling people, encouraging people, especially those who have heart disease, to eat a diet high in fresh fruits and vegetables. And nope, that's not going to work. Nope. And vegetarians tend to live longer than those in general population. Vegetarians, are we talking about specifically people to become vegetarians? And they tend to live longer, longevity, sorry. But then people can live longer with heart diseases as well. And the major concern, what's the argument? Again, I think we should come back, following my own advice, staying at the argument at hand. Heart disease is a major concern, not longevity. No, no. Uh, those with heart disease that eat few or no fresh fruits and vegetables have heart attacks at a much higher rate than do. Okay, so that's very straightforward. E is correct. E is correct. If I had read E, probably I would have checked it then and there. Yeah, so E is correct because, and what's the problem with, yeah, the problem with B is you'll have to assume, okay, because they're not living close to these agricultural lands, that necessarily means that they do not have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, which is something of an assumption, right? And I think the problem with D was that even if vegetarians tend to live longer than those in general population, like if I'm a doctor and I'm making an argument that people should be eating more fresh fruits and vegetables because heart disease is such a major concern, and you come to me saying, yeah, you're right. Or okay, okay. Or if I try to support my position by saying, do you know vegetarians tend to live longer than those in the general population? Well, you can still have a question, counter question, like how does that, Mr. Doctor, support your argument? Like they might still be living longer with heart diseases. Like, you know, are we talking about longevity or specifically heart diseases? Longevity is different. It's a different ballgame. So how does that directly support your argument? Option E, however, would directly support my argument. So, uh, due to an easing of state sanctions against hunting, Deersdale Preserve has experienced an influx of hunters this winter. Influx is when, there's a huge number coming in. So because the lifted sanctions, probably easing of sanctions or lifting of sanctions, lots and lots of hunters came to the preserve. Okay. And during this time, the silver-tailed fox, which is a popular target for hunters, has seen a marked decrease in population. Hmm. So, in the same time, fox population has gone down and the hunters love hunting it. Okay. And the keyword therefore tells me that there's probably a position that the argument is going to take from this line onwards. So let's read through it. Therefore, to prevent the population of silver-tailed fox, and I never read the text, this text in the breaks because that just ruins my flow. I do not ignore it. I come back to it later, but yeah. All right. So therefore, to prevent the population of silver-tailed fox from falling even lower, the state should once again place strict sanctions against hunting. Okay, so that's the argument. So to prevent the numbers of fox from going even lower, to prevent this, they should put sanctions. Okay, now I can read what I ignored temporarily. So silver-tailed fox is an important predator responsible for keeping the Deersdale County's rabbit population in check. Okay, fine. This fox um, controls rabbit population. Probably, in fact, almost certainly by eating it, right? Now, which of the following, if true, may suggest that stricter sanctions against hunting would not have the desired effect? So basically, the action item would be to pick an option which shows sanctions wouldn't work. Okay, sanctions wouldn't work. And it's always a good practice to think about the type of option that would do that. Like, let's say if I am a ranger in the preserve and I go to a superior, um, an officer in the government, and I request him or her that you should be vouching for the sanctions to be put back on because you guys allowed hunters and the fox population is going down. What reply could that person give me, right? Which would imply that no, putting back sanctions wouldn't work. I mean, the person could say, "Oh, Sikandar, it's not because of the hunters. Do you know there's a disease amongst the fox now?" Or the person could say, "We checked with the hunters. They're hunting rabbits, or they're hunting some other animal. They haven't hunted a single fox this year or this season, this winter." They're talking about winter, okay? Uh, or something like, no, the fox population has declined because the foxes have migrated elsewhere, or something like, okay, there's a new predator in the preserve, and we have seen some aberrant behaviors. That predator, like maybe, I do not know if lions and foxes live in the same habitat or not, but just for the sake of argument, let's say they do. So, there are now lions who are going after foxes, hunting foxes. So that's causing the decline in the fox population, not the hunters. And so putting back sanctions wouldn't work, right? So we're looking for an option of that sort. All right. Option A says the population of rabbits has surged ever since the hunting sanction in Deersdale County were lifted. So ever since they have lifted the sanctions, the rabbit population has surged, has gone up. How does that tell you that putting sanctions would save the foxes? I mean, you could make a force link. Oh, since fox eats rabbits and rabbits have gone up, that means fox are dying or the population is going. We already know the population is going down, right? So even if we make the rabbit population might be surging because of something else as well. Let me put that there as well. But even if we think about it, that kind of tells you, okay, fine, probably the fox population is going down then. We already know that. You have to pick an option which shows you which tells us that putting sanctions wouldn't work. This doesn't do that. Clearly doesn't do that. Okay, B. So if that superior of mine, that senior of mine tells me, कि Sikandar, the silver-tailed fox population varies greatly throughout the year, especially during winter when when prey becomes scarce. Yeah, that's a good option. Yeah, because that gives you a counter reason for why the silver-tailed fox population might be going down. So that's a very good option. C, the local authorities are expecting even more hunters in the coming year to arrive to the park. Like if my superior tells me that, I'm going to say, well, guess what? All the more reason to put sanctions back. But that's not what the question is asking us to do. My senior should give me a reply which shows that putting sanctions would not help. So this is wrong. This is doing the opposite of what the question is asking me to do. D says the silver-tailed fox had been experiencing a population surge shortly before the state sanctions against hunting were eased. So if my senior says, do you know, Sikandar, fox population was going up before sanctions were lifted? Well, that would just bolster my point. No, my argument is that you should be putting sanctions back to save fox population. And I think it's one of those questions where you keep forgetting what you're supposed to do. Like that just happened to me right now. For a moment, I was like, oh, okay, that could be correct. No, it's not correct because D is doing the opposite. If my superior tells me this, tells me what is being said in D, that would bolster my argument instead of weakening it, right? He or she should be saying something which implies or which shows you that putting back sanctions wouldn't save fox population, right? This does the opposite, so it goes out, man. Okay, E, the gray wolf, a large predator that competes with the silver-tailed fox over Deerdale Preserve's rabbit population, has seen its numbers decrease since the arrival of the hunters. So my senior tells me that, do you know the wolf has seen its numbers decreasing? I mean, I would probably say, okay, see, that's why I'm asking you to put the sanctions back on, because even the wolves are dying since the hunters have arrived to the preserve. So it's most probably the hunters, but that's not what the question is asking me to do. The question wants that superior, that senior of mine to say something to me which undermines my argument, not support it in some way. Option B, in short, is the best option because it gives you a counter reason for why the fox population might be declining. Okay, so there's some technology analyst talking in this paragraph saying that the programmers at the website Cyber Epicuria have recently made a breakthrough, perfecting a special program in which users can enter any foods or any flavors they like, and the website will suggest different food and food combinations with somewhat different flavors that the users will also like. Okay, fine. So that's a long piece of information there. So there are some websites, cyber, I'm just gonna call it cyber. They've done something big, you know. You enter a food you like, it it gives you suggestions based upon that, which you'll also like. You'll like those as well. Okay. Now, the website will charge users a modest fee for access, and users of beta version have reported that because of the program's suggestions, they have discovered whole new categories of food they have come to enjoy. Okay, so so the website would charge you a small fee, a modest fee for access, and users of beta version are basically saying it works. It works, yeah. Because of the website, they discovered food that they would like. All right. Now, because, okay, now that is definitely an argument. Because Cyber Epicuria is the only website offering this service, the only website, like one and only, doing this, okay, in the market. Anyone who invests in Cyber Epicuria right now is likely to double or triple their money in the next 2 years, okay? That's a strong assertion. So, because it's the one, and I do not know why I wrote and in the symbolic way and then in the alphabetic. So it's because it's one and only, your investment, and if you invest, you're going to double or triple your money. Okay. So the question is, which of the following, if true, most seriously weakens the analyst argument above? So what could be then? Investing would not be profitable, wouldn't be a good idea. Maybe profitable, yeah, maybe that's what it's trying to do, trying to make us do. Okay, and what's the argument at hand? The argument at hand is clearly that because it's the one and only, investing in it would double or triple your money, right? All right, so there's two parts of it, that the money would get double and triple, and that would happen because it's the one and only in the market. All right, option A says that last year the cooking channel aired a few episodes of Like This, Try That, a show in which chefs recommended foods similar in taste to known popular foods. And the program was so popular that it will be releasing a website next week. Yeah, that does, like if I'm an investor, that does makes me a little leery of the claim that you're going to double or triple your money in the next 2 years, right? Because there's another similar thing coming up, and you are telling me that because it is the one and only, you're going to double or triple your money. But guess what? There's something similar coming. So it's a very strong option, probably the correct one as well. According to surveys, as many as 60% of Americans report being tired of eating the same foods over and over again. Well, if like more than half of them are tired of eating the same foods again and again, that actually bolsters the argument that your investment might be safe. And we're not looking to do that. We are trying to say something which shows that the investment wouldn't be profitable. It does the opposite. It kind of tells you that investment would be profitable. Okay, Charlie, the flavor or taste of any food depends on number of complex chemical properties, making it an extremely difficult quality to model with a computer program. I'm thinking maybe I can play the courtroom here. If you are telling me that you should invest, someone people should invest in Cyber Epicuria because they're going to double or triple their money. It's the only website doing this, and it works. And if I have to undermine what you're saying, which, by the way, what the question is asking us to do, and if I say that the flavor or taste of any food depends on the number of complex chemical properties, making it an extremely difficult quality model with a computer program, you can simply go ahead and say, well, that's what I started with, that the programmers at the website Cyber Epicuria have recently made a breakthrough, all right? We already know. You were already told that we or they made a breakthrough, right? So even if it's difficult, we have made a breakthrough. That just tells you that other people's websites or similar businesses would find it difficult to enter this area. So that actually bolsters the argument that you're going to double or triple your money, right? So we are not looking to bolster it, right? We are looking to undermine it. That investment wouldn't be profitable. Okay, delta. The human experience of a taste of any food has more to do than most people realize with the subtle sense received by the olfactory system. Okay, let's say if that's true, how does that say that investing wouldn't be profitable? Because it's the one and only website. That's a confusing option. Like, is the option trying to say that the website wouldn't work because more than what most people realize, the taste of any food has a lot to do with the subtle sense. Yeah, but then we know that the website works. Like, users of beta version have reported that because of the program's suggestions, they have discovered whole new categories of food that they have come to enjoy. Okay, fine. This does not undermine, because it can raise a question in the reader's mind that, oh, maybe this is why the website wouldn't work, but then we have proof that it works, all right? So yeah, it's irrelevant, doesn't do anything to the argument. When a dish has a number of ingredients, adding or subtracting or substituting just one spice or flavor involved can radically change the overall taste of the dish. Does that mean that its suggestions would be way too different from what people actually like, and because of that, this is not going to work? Well, again, guess what? From the same reason, with the same reason that I eliminated option D, I'm going to eliminate this because we already know it works. A is your best option, right? Because A hits the argument in the foundation. The argument is because it's the one and only, that's why you're going to double or triple your money in the next 2 years. It tells you, no, there's something else which is going to be similar, which is upcoming and is popular as well. Many people suffer an allergic reaction to certain sulfites, not all sulfites, to certain sulfites, including those that are commonly added to wine as preservatives. Okay, so that's a piece of information that people are allergic to certain sulfites, not all, like certain sulfites are allergic, and then a subset of that is what is added to wine as preservatives. Okay. However, since there are several winemakers who add sulfites to none of the wines they produce, okay, however, okay, let's complete reading it. People who would like to drink wine but are allergic to sulfites can drink wines produced by these winemakers without risking an allergic reaction to sulfites. Okay. Okay, so it's a very fancy way to say, I'd say, if you want to avoid allergy or an allergic reaction, allergy to sulfites, drink wine from from a certain type of winemakers who do not add sulfites. Okay. All right. Now, which of the following is an assumption on which the argument depends? This is a specific type of question for which I developed a certain type of approach, which helped me a great deal. And that was like I would think about the argument like a box, you know. So the argument is a box, and if it depends on an assumption, well, we can think of that assumption like some table, you know, on which the argument is resting on, right? On which the argument is resting on. And if we have to identify which one of the options is an assumption on which the argument is resting on, we can't simply read the options, assume the exact opposite, and see the box falling, right? If the argument looks bonkers, then that would mean that, oh, the argument was dependent on this assumption, right? So what's the argument? Let's say, if I'm telling you that you are allergic to sulfites, right? And if you want to avoid sulfite allergy from wine consumption, you should be consuming wine from winemakers who are not adding sulfites to their wines. What can you say in return that would completely make my argument drop, right? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to assume the opposite of what the options are saying. All right, let's say that these winemakers, let's say, have not been able to duplicate the preservative effect produced by adding sulfites by means that do not involve adding any potentially allergenic substances to their wine. Okay. All right. Let's say that they are, again, assuming the opposite of saying the opposite of what option A is saying. Let's say they are still adding substances, right, which are allergic. So if I'm telling you that to avoid sulfite allergy, right, you should drink wine from these people, and you try to undermine my argument and say that they are still adding allergenic substances, well, I would say that does not do anything to my argument. I was saving you from sulfite allergy, not just any allergic substance, right? So by assuming the opposite of option A, we can see that it does not hit the argument. It does not make the argument drop. So the argument was not dependent on it, right? Otherwise, the argument would look bonkers. Okay, but if you say the opposite of B, would that affect my argument? Like if you tell me that, Sikandar, all forms of sulfite are equally likely to produce the allergic reaction, I would just reply, but they're not even adding sulfites. It does not do anything to my argument, right? So yeah, assuming the opposite did not affect my argument. So assuming B would not help my argument in any way. So my argument is not dependent on B. C. If you tell me that wine is not the only beverage to which sulfites are commonly added, I would simply say, so what? My argument is that if you want to avoid sulfite allergy from wine consumption categorically, then drink wine from these winemakers. They're not adding sulfites to their wine. I'm not concerned with any other beverage. So yeah, assuming C does not help my argument. How do I know that? Because I tried assuming the opposite and it did not have any adverse effect on my argument. Okay, C goes out. And if you tell me that, do you know, Sikandar, apart from sulfites, there are substances commonly present in wine that give rise to an allergic reaction, I would say, so what? I'm trying to save you from sulfite allergy. That's my argument. You are allergic to sulfite, and you can get, you can trigger an allergic reaction from consuming wine from people who are mixing sulfite as preservatives in their wines. And so I am suggesting you to consume wine from people who are not doing that, who are not adding sulfites as preservatives. So even if there are other substances which can cause an allergic reaction, that does not hit my argument. I'm just trying to save you from sulfite allergy from wine consumption. So yeah, by the process of elimination, E must be the right option, but let's see. Let's try assuming the opposite of E and see if my argument falls down. Let's say if you say that, do you know, Sikandar, sulfites are naturally present in the wines produced by these winemakers in amounts large enough to produce an allergic reaction in someone who drinks these wines? Well, that would completely break my argument. Because I was trying to save you from sulfite allergy, which you might get because you consume wine and people mix sulfite in wine, right? So I was trying to redirect you towards winemakers who are not adding it. But if your reply is, sulfites are naturally present in wine in amounts large enough to cause an allergic reaction, right? My argument goes down. It falls down. Yeah. So you have to, sorry, assume E to make the argument work. So what was the question? The question was to identify an assumption on which the argument depends. The argument definitely depends on assuming E, because when we assume the opposite, the argument falls, right? So you have to assume that sulfites are not naturally present in the wines produced by these winemakers in amounts large enough to cause an allergy, right? To make an argument that, okay, if you're allergic to sulfites, um, winemakers add sulfites to their wines, go for winemakers who are not doing it, right? We'll have to assume it to make that argument. So the argument is dependent upon E. Again, that's one way of looking at it, but my way of looking at it is a little indirect. I don't know, whatever works for you, let me know in the comments. So yeah, my way was to assume the opposite and see the argument falling. If it falls, okay, fine. My argument was dependent on that assumption. That's why it fell. A sudden increase in the production of elephant ivory artifacts on the Mediterranean coast, like all right, the Mediterranean coast of North Africa occurred in the 10th century. I've always struggled with this north, south, east, west thing. So for me, taking some sort of a visual aid is always helpful. So okay, let's say this is Africa and that's North Africa, and there was a sudden increase in what? In the production of elephant ivory. Okay, in 10th century, some ivory artifacts were being produced more or whatever. Okay, moving on. Historians explain this increase as a result of an area opening up as a new source of ivory and argue on this basis that the important medieval trade, this is medieval time, is it? It's 10, yeah. That the important medieval trade between North Africa and East Africa began at this period. So you have the argument of basically the historians, which are saying that, between North Africa and East Africa, the important trade started during this time. What time was it? Yeah, 10th century. Started in or around or during 10th century. Okay. And now we have to pick an option which, if true, provides some support for the historian's accounts. What is the historian's account? The historian's account is that the important trade between North and East Africa happened around the 10th century, right? So you have to pick an option which does not support it. Again, it's a very tortuous way of putting it. If true, provides some support for the historian's account described above, except, right? So all options support the historian's account to some extent, except this one option that you need to look for, right? So basically, action item, because if you keep going back to this question, oh my God, is that going to confuse you? It's going to confuse me at least. So the action item would be the trade was happening after or before this time, right? Yeah. If some option tells you the important trade was happening before it as well, or after that, it actually started afterwards. Well, of course, that would not be supporting the historian's account in any way, right? If anything, it would be weakening. All right. In East Africa, here, gold coins from Mediterranean North Africa have been found at a 10th century site, but no earlier site. I mean, that bolsters the historian argument. But no, it was in the 10th century that something special happened, which kind of ignited the important trade between North Africa and East Africa. So now it's providing some support for historians' account. B, the many surviving letters of before 10th century North African merchants includes no mention of business transaction involving East Africa. I mean, that also kind of supports historian arguments, no? Because the historian is saying something important happened, in 10th century BC or not, and just in 10th century, and that is when the trade between North Africa and East Africa started. And if someone says, do you know, before 10th century, there's no mention of transactions in some letters found at some site involving North and East Africa. Well, that adds to the argument here. See, it wasn't happening before 10th century. It happened in 10th century and onwards, in 10th century. So yeah, it supports the argument. We have to show that it was happening before, or maybe it actually started happening after 10th century, an option that kind of says something like that. Excavations in East Africa reveal a 10th century change in architectural style to reflect North African patterns. So it uses a specific word 10th century. Something happened in 10th century in East Africa which reflects North African architectural styles. I mean, that again bolsters the argument that something happened or the important trade might have started in 10th century because see, even the excavations in East Africa reveal a 10th century change in architectural style reflecting North African patterns. So now that's wrong. All right, D, documents from Mediterranean Europe. How did Europe come in here? But yeah, it might be relevant. And North Africa. Okay, so you have North Africa as well. So they have some documents from North Africa that date back earlier than the 10th century. So before 10th century, show knowledge of East African animals. Yeah, that kind of establishes something pre-10th century between North and East Africa. Although I do feel the Mediterranean Europe part is not relevant. But okay, it's a good option. E, East African carvings in a style characteristic of the 10th century specifically, depict seagoing vessels, all right, very different from those used by local sailors, but of a type common in the Mediterranean, and that's a good option as well. Is it? No? Is it? Like, East African carvings show seagoing vessels from the 10th century, which were quite different from those you. Oh, no, 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 it provides support because it again tells you that something happened in 10th century and it might end up actually bolstering the argument that the important trade between North and East Africa might have started in 10th century because see, inside East Africa, in if you talk about the carvings uh, from 10th century, they're depicting seagoing vessels which are super different from those used by local sailors, but of a type more common in the sea, in the Mediterranean Sea, right? So yeah, that might end up supporting the argument in a way. Okay, something happened in 10th century. So long story short, E, if you compare D and E, D provides no support for the argument. In fact, it might end up undermining the argument because it forms the link between North Africa and East Africa before 10th century, that they had knowledge of East Africa before 10th century. So it provides zero support for the historian's account. So option D is the correct option.